I never imagined my life would take such a drastic turn in such a short time. I was a 25-year-old woman with a seemingly perfect life. I had a wonderful boyfriend, Jack, with whom I'd been in a relationship for 5 years. We met in college and had been inseparable ever since. He was everything a girl could want, attentive, caring, intelligent, and with a great sense of humour. Our friends saw us as the ideal couple, and I myself believed I had found the man of my life. Everything changed on a summer night during a visit to Jack's parents' house. It was a tradition to spend at least one weekend a month with them in their elegant house on the outskirts of the city. I had always felt welcome there, especially by his mother, Sarah, a 50-year-old woman who looked like she stepped out of a fashion magazine. Sarah was the epitome of sophistication. Tall, slender, with perfectly styled brown hair and green eyes that seemed to pierce your soul. She always dressed elegantly, even at home, and had an air of mystery that made you want to know more about her. From the beginning, she had treated me with a warmth that made me feel like part of the family. That night, after a pleasant dinner, Jack excused himself early, claiming fatigue from an intense week at work. I was left alone in the living room, flipping through a magazine while his father retired to his study. It was then that Sarah appeared with 2 glasses of red wine in her hands. "I thought you might like some company," she said, with a smile that lit up the room. She offered me a glass and sat next to me on the couch, closer than usual. At first, our conversation was casual. We talked about my work, my aspirations, my dreams. Sarah seemed genuinely interested in every word I said, her eyes fixed on me in a way that made me feel special. As the wine flowed, I noticed a subtle change in her behaviour. Her laughs became more frequent, her touches more prolonged. "You know, I've always admired your spirit," Sarah said, placing her hand on my knee. "You're exactly the kind of woman I would have liked to be at your age." I felt a shiver run down my spine. Her touch, though innocent at first glance, awakened sensations in me that I had never experienced before. I tried to ignore it, attributing it to alcohol and fatigue. But it was undeniable that something was changing. As the night progressed, Sarah began to share stories of her youth, of forbidden loves and passionate adventures. Her voice, soft and seductive, enveloped me. Like a caress, I found myself leaning towards her, drinking in every word, every gesture. "Never let anyone extinguish your inner fire," she whispered, getting so close that I could feel her breath on my cheek. "You're too beautiful, too special to settle for an ordinary life." At that moment, Sarah did something that would change the course of our lives forever, with a delicacy that contrasted with the boldness of her act. She brushed her lips against mine. It was a soft kiss, almost ethereal, but charged with an intensity that left me breathless. I pulled away, confused and scared by what had just happened. My mind was a whirlwind of contradictory emotions. On one hand, I knew what had happened was wrong. She was my boyfriend's mother, for God's sake. But on the other hand, I couldn't deny the spark of desire that had ignited within me. I should go to sleep," I stammered, standing up on shaky legs. Sarah looked at me with a mixture of desire and understanding. "Of course, dear, rest well. And remember, what happens in this house stays in this house." That night I could barely sleep. Jack slept peacefully beside me, oblivious to the turmoil unleashed within me. I felt guilty, confused, but also strangely excited. What was happening to me? How could I be attracted to my boyfriend's mother? The following days were torture. Every time we visited Jack's parents, I felt Sarah's gaze upon me, loaded with promises and secrets I tried to avoid. Keep my distance, but it was as if an invisible force was drawing me to her. It was during another visit, a few weeks later, when everything spiraled out of control. Jack had gone out with his father to buy some things for Sunday's barbecue. I offered to help Sarah in the kitchen, naively, thinking that the presence of domestic tasks would keep any tension at bay. How wrong I was. As soon as we were alone, Sarah closed the kitchen door, and approached me with the grace of a panther stalking its prey. Without a word, she cornered me against the counter and kissed me with a passion that left me breathless. This time I didn't resist. I responded to the kiss with an urgency that surprised even myself. Our hands explored, our bodies melded. It was as if all the tension accumulated over weeks exploded in a moment of madness and pleasure. "I've desired you from the first moment I saw you," Sarah whispered between kisses. "You're too special for my son. You deserve someone who can show you pleasures you haven't even imagined." Her words should have horrified me, but instead they ignited a fire within me that threatened to consume me. At that moment, I forgot everything: my relationship with Jack, loyalty, morality. Only Sarah and I existed, and the scorching desire that united us. We separated just in time, before Jack and his father returned. But the damage was already done. I had crossed a line I knew I shouldn't cross, and the worst part was that I wanted to keep crossing it over and over again. The following months were a whirlwind of emotions and clandestine encounters. Sarah and I developed a secret language of looks and subtle touches that went unnoticed by the rest of the family. We found excuses to be alone. I offering to help with household chores. She asking for my opinion on some decorating project. Each encounter was more intense than the last. Sarah introduced me to a world of pleasure I had never imagined. She taught me things about my own body that I didn't even know were possible. With her, I felt free, uninhibited, able to explore facets of my sexuality that had always remained hidden. But with each moment of ecstasy, the weight of guilt also grew. I saw Jack, so loving and trusting, and felt my heart breaking in two. He didn't deserve this, no one deserved this. I tried to end the relationship with Sarah several times, but she always found a way to lure me back. "This is bigger than us," she would say. "It's the kind of love you only find once in a lifetime. You can't deny it, you can't run from it." And she was right, I couldn't run, no matter how hard I tried. The relationship with Sarah had become an addiction, something I needed as much as air to breathe. Our affair became increasingly risky. We met in roadside motels, in the car parked in lonely places, even in the house I shared with Jack when he was on business trips. Each encounter was a mix of adrenaline, passion, and fear of being discovered. One night, after a particularly intense encounter, Sarah revealed something that left me cold. "You're not the first, you know," she said, as she traced circles on my bare back. "I've had other lovers before, young women, beautiful, full of life like you, but none have meant as much to me." Her words should have horrified me, but instead, I felt a pang of jealousy. How many others had been in my place? How many had tasted her kisses, felt her caresses? "What happened to them?" I asked, fearing the answer. Sarah smiled with a mixture of nostalgia and cruelty. "Life went on. Some got married, others left. But they all remember me, I'm sure. No one forgets their first forbidden adventure." At that moment, I realized I was trapped in a web much larger than I had imagined. Sarah wasn't just a woman experiencing a midlife crisis. She was a predator, a master in the art of seduction and manipulation. But the scariest thing of all was that, despite knowing this, I couldn't stay away from her. Months passed and our relationship became increasingly intense and complicated. Sarah became more possessive, demanding more of my time and attention. She began to make comments about my relationship with Jack, subtly suggesting that I leave him. "He'll never be able to give you what I give you," she would say. "With me, you can be who you really are, without masks, without inhibitions." I was torn in a sea of confusion. On one hand, the passion I felt for Sarah was undeniable. She awakened sensations in me that I had never experienced before. But on the other hand, I loved Jack. He had been my companion, my support, my best friend for years. The idea of leaving him broke my heart. My life became a constant act with Jack. I tried to be the perfect girlfriend, attentive and loving, with Sarah. I immersed myself in a whirlwind of passion and forbidden desire. I lived in a constant state of anxiety, fearing that at any moment everything would be discovered. It was then that something happened that would change everything. One night, after a family dinner, Jack asked me to accompany him to the garden. Under the moonlight, he knelt and pulled out a ring. "You're the love of my life," he said with eyes shining with emotion. "Would you do me the honor of marrying me?" My world stopped. I looked at the ring, then at Jack, and finally towards the house, where I could see Sarah watching us from the window. Her expression was unreadable. I need time to think about it," I stammered, leaving Jack confused and hurt. That night, while Jack slept, I snuck into Sarah's study. I found her waiting for me, as if she had known I would come. "So my son finally decided," she said with a smile that didn't reach her eyes. "What are you going to do?" "I don't know," I confessed, on the verge of tears. "I desire you, Sarah. But I also love Jack. I can't go on like this." Sarah approached me, her intoxicating perfume clouding my senses as always. "Then choose," she whispered. "Him or me, a life of security and conformity, or a life of passion and adventure." At that moment, my mind traveled through all the moments I had shared with both of them, the years of love and companionship with Jack, the nights of unbridled passion with Sarah. How could I choose? My story isn't over yet. Please consider subscribing to the channel. Thank you. We return to the story. As I struggled with this emotional crossroads, something inside me finally broke. The tears I had been holding back for months began to flow freely. "I can't go on with this," I sobbed. "This is destroying all of us." Sarah looked at me with a mixture of surprise and something that seemed almost relief. She approached me and for the first time since our affair began, hugged me without any sexual intention. It was a comforting embrace, almost maternal. "Perhaps," she said softly, "it's time for both of us to face the truth." That night, Sarah told me her complete story. She spoke of her unhappy marriage, of how she had felt trapped for years in a life she hadn't chosen. She told me about her past affairs, not with pride, but with a resigned sadness. "Every time I seduced a young woman like you," she confessed, "it was as if I was trying to recover a part of myself that I had lost long ago, but I always ended up feeling emptier than before." Her words hit me like a punch to the stomach. Suddenly, I saw our relationship in a new light. It wasn't the great forbidden love I had imagined. It was the desperate attempt of two women to fill a void in their lives. "What are we going to do?" I asked suddenly, feeling very small and scared. Sarah took my hand and squeezed it gently. "We're going to do the right thing," she said with a determination I had never seen in her before. "For once in my life, I'm going to do the right thing." The next morning, Sarah gathered the whole family in the living room. Jack looked at me with concern, probably thinking I was going to reject his marriage proposal. His father seemed confused by the sudden family. Meeting with a voice that trembled slightly, Sarah began to speak. She confessed everything, her unhappiness in the marriage, her past affairs, and finally, our relationship. I watched as Jack's face went from confusion to shock, and finally to a mixture of pain and anger that broke my heart. "I'm so sorry," I said through tears when Sarah finished. "I never wanted this to happen. I never wanted to hurt you, Jack." The silence that followed was deafening. Jack's father looked at his wife as if she were a stranger. Jack had a lost look, as if trying to process everything he had just heard. Finally, Jack spoke, his voice barely a whisper. "How long?" "6 months," I replied, unable to look him in the eye. Jack abruptly stood up and left the room. I wanted to follow him, but his father stopped me with a gesture. "Give him time," he said, his voice laden with a sadness that made me realize how much damage we had caused. The following days were hell. Jack refused to talk to me. His parents started divorce proceedings, and I suddenly found myself without a boyfriend, without a lover, and with a feeling of guilt that threatened to drown me. It was at that moment that I made the most difficult decision of my life. I needed to get away from everything and everyone. I needed time to heal. to forgive myself, and hopefully, for others to forgive me. Someday I packed my things and moved to another city. I started therapy, trying to understand what had led me to make the decisions I made. Little by little, I began to rebuild my life. Months passed before I heard from Jack. One day, I received an email from him. He told me that although he was still hurt, he had begun to understand. He didn't forgive me, not yet, but he wanted us to know that he was working on it. Sarah also contacted me. She told me that she had started therapy, that she was trying to fix her relationship with her son, and that, for the first time in years, she was learning to be alone with herself. As time passed, I began to see our story with new eyes. It wasn't a story of forbidden love, as I had thought at first. It was a story of two lost people, looking in the wrong place for something they could only find in themselves. Today, years after that fateful night, I can say that I have forgiven Sarah, and most importantly, I have forgiven myself. Jack and I have managed to rebuild a fragile but sincere friendship. We will never be what we were, but there is a mutual respect that I deeply value Sarah, and I haven't seen each other again. But I know from Jack that she's doing better. She has found a peace that she never had during her marriage and is rebuilding her relationship with her son step by step. As for me, I have learned a lot about love, loyalty, and honesty. I have learned that true love doesn't ask you to betray yourself or others. I have learned that passion without respect and without honesty is a flame that consumes everything in its path. Now I'm in a new relationship, a relationship based on trust, mutual respect, and absolute honesty. It's not as exciting as my affair with Sarah. It doesn't have that spark of danger that made me feel alive, but it has something much more valuable: peace. I look back at that time in my life, not with nostalgia, but with a mixture of sadness and gratitude. Sadness for the pain I caused, gratitude for the lessons I learned. If there's one thing I've learned from all this, it's that there are no shortcuts in life. You can't find happiness in someone else's arms if you're not happy with yourself. You can't build something lasting on the foundation of a lie. Sometimes, when I'm alone, I think about Sarah. I wonder if she thinks about me too, not with desire or longing, but with the quiet acceptance that we were an important part of each other's life at a crucial moment. Our story wasn't a fairy tale. It didn't have a happy ending in the traditional sense, but it was real, it was intense, and it changed us all forever, and perhaps in the end, that's what matters. Not how a story begins, not even how it ends, but how it transforms us in the process. Today, as I write these words, I realize that I can finally close this chapter of my life. I'm no longer the naive young woman who let herself be seduced by the excitement of the forbidden. Nor am I the woman tormented by guilt that I was afterwards. I'm someone new. Someone who has made mistakes, yes, but who has learned from them. Someone who understands that true love is not a storm of passion, but a constant flame that warms you without burning you. And if I could go back and talk to my younger self, I would tell her to be patient. That true love comes when you're ready to receive it, not when you desperately search for it in the wrong places. I would tell her to be honest. Always. That the truth can hurt, but lies destroy. I would tell her to love herself first. Not to seek in others what she can only find within herself. And above all, I would tell her not to fear the future. That every mistake, every stumble, every broken heart is one more step on the path to the person she is meant to be. As I finish writing this story, I feel a peace that I hadn't experienced in a long time. It's as if, by sharing my experience, I could finally free myself from its weight. I don't know what the future holds for me. I don't know if I'll ever see Sarah again or if my friendship with Jack will strengthen over time. What I do know is that I'm ready for whatever comes, because now I understand that love, true love, begins with oneself. And that's a love that no one can take away from you. As I close this chapter of my life, I feel a sense of both closure and new beginnings. the woman who entered into that affair with Sarah, no longer exists. In her place stands someone stronger, wiser, and more self-aware. I've learned that life isn't black and white, that good people can make bad choices, and that what seems like love can sometimes be a reflection of our own insecurities and unfulfilled needs. I think about Jack sometimes, about the life we could have had if things had been different. But I don't dwell on it. He deserves happiness, and I hope he finds it. Last I heard, he was dating someone new, someone who makes him laugh in a way I never could. It stings a little, but mostly I'm glad for him. As for Sarah, I hope she's found peace. I hope she's learned to love herself without needing the validation of others. Our affair was like a wildfire, intense, all-consuming, but ultimately destructive. Now I seek love that's more like a steady hearth, warm, comforting, and enduring. My new relationship is different from anything I've experienced before. It's built on honesty, mutual respect, and shared growth. We talk about everything, even the hard stuff. There are no secrets, no hidden desires. It's not always easy, but it's real in a way that my relationship with Sarah never was. I still think about those months sometimes, the thrill, the passion, the feeling of being desired so intensely. But I also remember the guilt, the fear, the constant anxiety. It's a chapter of my life. I'm glad to have closed. To anyone who might find themselves in a similar situation, I would say this: the allure of the forbidden is powerful, but it's a mirage. Real love, lasting love, doesn't require secrecy or betrayal. It's built on trust, honesty, and mutual respect. As I end this story, I feel a sense of hope. Hope for myself, for Jack, for Sarah, and for anyone who's ever found themselves lost. In the labyrinth of desire and betrayal, there's always a way out, always a chance for redemption and growth. Life goes on. We make mistakes. We learn. We grow. And sometimes, if we're lucky, we find the strength to tell our stories, hoping that others might learn from our experiences. This is my story. It's not pretty, it's not perfect, but it's mine. And in sharing it, I hope I've shed some light on the complex, messy, beautiful thing we call love. As I write these final words, I feel lighter. The burden I've carried for so long has finally been set down. Whatever the future holds, I'm ready to face it. Older, wiser, and finally at peace with myself. End of story.